Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. It's 11 o'clock on Friday. It's Stephen Friday once again, folks. And I'm so excited. I look forward to this every single week. And what's amazing to me is how fast it goes. It's like we're on our 26th episode, which is nuts. But I'm so thankful today. And I'm going to give you a piece of advice to start off the show today. Here's my advice: get a friend like Steve. That's my recommendation to you. So, what does that really mean? I'm 50 years old. Steve is 72, I think, right? So having an older guy who's got some experience, I'd recommend to everybody. Find yourself somebody who can speak into your life that's not your age. Then, number two, get somebody that's your age, that's your friend. I got one of those too. His name's Ray. And you know what? We kind of, it's like we play a little pickleball, right? We serve it back and forth to each other. But it's really interesting. And then I would encourage you to have somebody that's younger, somebody that you're feeding into, right? That and this could be your family too, right? It could be your daughters or son or whatever. And I see that in my own life, and I'm like, there's a lot of richness in that. And what I think you don't realize, and I don't want to speak for Steve and all of this stuff, but it's a blessing to him as well. But I'm so thankful for this kind of being complete, because you get a different perspective from people. And there's a level of, you want to find somebody like Steve, right? Who is thoughtful, kind, non-judgmental, but also he ain't gonna lie to you. And so there's a lot of value in that. And I'm sure Steve recognized that, because that's what we do here. We're in the process of guiding one another. We're living this life together, and it's better in community. And we know that from all the folks that are around us. And so I just want to say welcome back and thank you so much. Let's say hello to Steve Staggs. What's up, Steve?
Hey man, how you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
Well, you made my day, sir. I appreciate that. And you're
Well,
right. It's been a blast. Been
it's
a
been a
great
blast.
relationship.
And what's interesting is, I'm so thankful for your willingness to take the time and to do it. But I think also, if I like it when my son's interested in what I have to say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, when you think about it, it's you've accumulated a lot of experience, and that isn't just spiritual related stuff. And it's like, hey, it's nice when there's people that are interested in going, hey, there's some value here. But I think that there's something more to it than that. I feel like that there's something, um it's kind of meant to be this way, in a way that that the older guys would help the younger guys, and you'd have peers and all that stuff. And I know that that's also reflected in the scriptures as well. We see that in many cases with like Paul and Barnabas, and we see that with other Timothy. um what do you have to say about that, as far as people out there who, I think a lot of men especially, we talk about suffering in silence and being alone and not having kind of a mentor relationship. And I don't even really like that term, but these friendships where we're transparent, where somebody's willing to let us like kind of be messy at times. And, you know, because you've created space for that. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that concept of being in a relationship like that?
Well, I mean, it's when we look at anybody who's watching this or this program or virtually anything on YouTube or television or anything like that, we pretty much have a very limited micro slice of history that we're dealing with. Um, and so for centuries, that was the development model. In those days, they called it apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Not too long before that, family business. Jesus, you were speaking with Jesus. Well, his earthly father Joseph was a carpenter, and guess what Jesus got to learn how to do?
Yeah.
Carpentry. And so that is very, very common. It's part of this upside down thing we're talking about too.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I have grandchildren that are in two sets. My son's children, who now are 20, 22, and 20, and then my daughter's children, who are 12 and 10. Um, and during the high school years, and just a little bit after that, you start feeling your oats as a young person. You start discovering that, wow, my brain actually thinks about stuff, and it concludes, and man, I've got opinions about things, and hey, man, I'm looking at things, and man, I got something to say about it, and I think I know how to fix the world and how the world should, all those things. I
Sure.
did it. My guess
Yep.
is you did it.
Yep. Yep.
And so early on, my grandchildren would occasionally ask me and think I was somewhat, ask me a question and opinion about something. And then when I would give them the answer, they would poo-poo me
Yeah.
and tell me how life really was. And so I would say to them, hey, when was the last time you went and asked counsel from Reese, who at the time was about 4 years old? What are you talking about? I don't ask for advice from Reese. I said, well, why not? There's only about 12, 13, 14 years difference between you. I mean, why don't you ask for her advice? Well, she doesn't know anything. I said, why didn't she know anything? Well, she's only 4. And I said, well, you're only 16,
Yep.
and I'm 65.
Yep. 16 going on 60.
Why would I ask advice from you or get input from you about how life operates? See, you haven't even earned a paycheck yet. And it wasn't with the intention of putting them down.
Right.
It was with the intention of saying, hey, listen, we live in a different time now where people of experience who have gained wisdom in life over the both the blessings and tremendous challenges of life, we've learned a few things. But in today's world, instead of reaching out and gaining from the benefit of that experience, we don't do that. We're told that those people are past their years. They're no longer, not only are they not wise, they are foolish and old and virtually of no value any longer.
Yeah.
And what that does is it cuts off that transmission of experience that the older generation is supposed to pass on to the younger generation, so authentic progress can actually be made.
Yeah.
I remember, and I'll finish. Didn't want this to be all this long, but I remember I had this coach. His name was Joe Tanner. And if anybody from the old Kansas City Academy days ever hears this stream, they'll remember Joe, old guy from Arkansas, one of the most unique, coaches, baseball coaches you could ever have a chance to come across. Did a ton of innovative stuff. Anyway, he would tell us when he'd sit down, he says, if you can learn in 10 minutes what it took me 10 years to learn, he said, you're 10 years ahead of the game. Why don't you try doing that? And, that made a lot of sense to me. He said that to me 50 years ago, and I'm still repeating it to this day. But that's what's missing is we don't get the 10-year benefit to learn in 10 minutes. Interestingly enough, my grandson really embraced that. And we talk all the time. And he'd say, Papa, I don't always agree with what you say, but I'm always listening.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to understand what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe we can get back to that.
No, we definitely will actually. And the irony is I didn't see how these would fit together, and they're going to fit together here really, really well. So thank you, Lord, for that. Let's say hello to the people who have come in to hang out with us in this somewhat seemingly random conversation that hopefully uh, comes back around. And that is Sam Kemp. Top of the morning to you, gents.
Yeah.
And
Hello,
Hex
Sam.
Monkey. What is up, Hex Monkey? Back in the house. I've been thinking about you, my friend. I hope that you're doing well. Thanks for stopping in. And then, of course, this guy, cooler than
Yeah.
the other side of the pillow. Mike Oshell. Morning, all. Praise the Lord. Mike, it is so good. A little comedy is actually a good sign from you.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
It's good to see you here, Mike. Thanks for being here. David Lee, all the way from southwestern Indiana. He's on the road again. On the road again. Some amazing things that he and his family have been doing, and just excited for Stace and for David Lee, and yeah. So
How's
thanks
she
for
doing,
being
by
here.
the way?
So
Doing all right?
yeah, I mean, she's
Good.
in a new study, and I'm sure he'll give us an update here when they get some more info. But that was like miraculous in and of itself, just the opportunity there. So we're certainly hopeful and praying for amazing, miraculous effects of this
Yeah.
really cool new treatment. NT Fryer's back as well. Happy
Hey,
Friday,
NT.
all. And then Robert Keller, good morning, ladies and gents. Great to have you here. Hex Glenn is back. And then Carter. What's up, Carter? He's a consistent one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carter met Hex Monkey at the Gen Con.
Yeah.
Um, so good to see y'all here. Well, let's talk about this. It's interesting. We start with this idea of, the this upside down, right side up thing. And it dawned on me when you said, hey, in the past, just by the nature of things, there was this apprenticeship model. And you mentioned Jesus and, his father's, hey, you're a carpenter, you learn the family trade. And you think there's scripture about, what should you do with the younger son, right? Well, when he gets up and when you walk on the road and when you eat and when you lie down, there's a model for, what I think in the church people would call discipleship, but is really kind of living life together. And, you pick up things along the way, and, the intentionality of sharing some of these things as you live life, right? As you wake
Yeah.
up and you go down and you walk on the road. But what's interesting about, technology and the busyness of life is I heard someone say that, do you realize the reason that they have bells in schools was the origin of the bells in school for the hour change for classes to change was actually based on the factory model. And that
Mm.
what they were trying to do was to create a scenario where the school system was preparing people for the factory life. And
Yeah.
this was obviously early, this is industrial revolution times. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. This bell ringing, this regimented thing, this assembly line kind of thing, discipline, sit down, shut up, do your thing. And it's a different, it's a model, right? And it's a model. But if you think about, let's say, and I'm not saying it's directly this, but let's say the upside down world is one in which it values conformity, whereas the right side up world values relationship. And it seems like this model, in a way, what we're doing here is a reflection of that relational model of one of apprenticeship. And so I just like it really kind of connected to me that, what are the systems that we put in place? Well, we want to extract value.
Yeah.
And so an upside down model would be one of sit down and shut up. And of course, our churches are set up that way too. When was the last time you could stand up and interrupt the pastor at church? I haven't seen it.
No.
And if you do,
No.
they escort you out.
Yes. 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 Right on. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, gosh, we could go in a lot of different, you know, uh, directions with, with that, Matt. And I mean, well, the thing I have to offer folks from my point of view um, is to give a peek inside the kingdom of God and how God created how he designed the creation to function. You know, I mean, I started this not with any particular interest other than what I described, way back when. Of anybody want to know Jesus? Well, hey man, here I am. I want to know him.
Yeah.
And I don't want to know about him. And I didn't think in those days of the difference between knowing about and knowing him. It was just a given to me that, hey, if I want to know the kid down the street who just moved in, I got to walk down there and say hi and start talking to him
Yeah.
and seeing if he wants to play. I mean, it's so basic and simple in that way. And it's exactly the same way with Jesus that we talk about all the time on the streams. There's no exclusivity in this club. It's an inclusive club, meaning all of creation is invited to the party. Not everybody is going to want to do that, but everybody's invited. So if you're invited, then what are you going to do with that invitation?
Yeah.
Well, what happens back, even going in the religious world, they create all kinds of barriers and conditions and standards and all of these various things. Well, when was the last time you had that with any other relationship in your life? Okay, now, if you want to meet the kid down the street, this is what you have to do. The first thing you got to do is you got to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then what you have to do is you have to go down there and you have to see if he has a book written about him. And if he has a book written about him, then what you have to do is you have to go and you have to read that book and really understand that book. And then you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The requirements that we place on getting to know God are so insane. Yeah. Compared to any other basic fundamental way relationships are built. It's mind-blowing.
That's one of the most compelling things about this whole, discussion that we've had over this last year is the simplicity of engagement. Because you're absolutely right. Because there's a lot of things where you got to get your act together before you meet the guy, right? As if he's a wizard. And I think that that's one of the things that makes this so accessible. I've said to you many times, you're making Jesus so much more accessible to people. Well, you're telling the story about when you're 6 years old and the pastor says, hey, do you want to meet Jesus? And you took him seriously. You're like, yes, I want to meet the guy. I'll introduce you to him. You're like, all right, where's he at? Is he in the back? And of course, you think about that from a child perspective. Anyone who's out there, you look at your life, Steve, and what I take from it is this. Here's a guy who's been wired as a professional, right? You got to the major leagues in baseball, which is to me an indication of your drive, your intensity, your focus to detail, your willingness to labor through pain, and discipline. And then to think that gaming analogy of baseball and professional baseball has led itself to, I'm going to apply these same concepts of who you've made me to be, and I'm going to apply that to you. Yeah. And what's the fruit of it? I think if I were to say, what's the nature of the fruit that comes from this effort, that how God made you and what you've done with him from when you were 6 years old to going, hey, who's this guy? You went down the street to meet Jesus, he moved in. And what I think is so cool is you've asked him questions, and what has he shared with you? I feel like a lot of what he shared with you is how he made this thing.
Yes.
And I think what's so neat about that is I've probed and probed and probed, and we've talked a lot before we started doing these streams. And a lot of times I was like, hold on, this is like rattling my cage, Steve. And I was asking you some really basic fundamental questions that you've heard before.
Yeah.
But you said it, we've said it many times. The truth can be probed and probed and probed and probed. Yeah. And I think that's one of the cool things about this is that you've never said to me, just trust me. No, never. You said, hey, go ask him yourself, test it. And so I was having this discussion. This is so cool. This is literally stream of consciousness. I'm sitting with Ray this morning and he said, well, you got to figure out what God wants from you. What Jesus wants you to do. That's what he said. What Jesus wants you to do. And I was like, All right, well, how do you do that, Ray, Mr. Smart Guy? How do you know what Jesus wants you to do? And you know what's interesting is we recalled together, I want to say it's Romans 12:2 or something like that. And it was like, do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you can test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. What's amazing is the term test and approve.
Yeah.
And thought about this one. So I'm not going to conform to the patterns of this world because the patterns of this world are upside down. So what am I going to do? I'm going to test and approve. And I thought about those words and they meant something new to me this morning.
Yeah.
What is the idea of testing something? And so what's interesting is I said, hey, Steve, what about this thing? And you go, well, why don't you go ask him yourself? Because if it's true, he'll confirm that with you. And that's the form of testing.
Yes.
The other piece of this is this idea of approving. You know, it's one thing to know about it and it to be true factually, and it's another thing for it to be approved as a functional mechanism. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? The difference between the two?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I was like, hold on a second. So the will of Jesus, the will of God in your life is knowable. But the first thing he warns about is the fact that the patterns of this world will be something that will be a distraction to you understanding his will. And that's like bing, light bulb, aha. And it made me think about Whitney Magic. Did you see that stream yesterday?
I did. What a sweet soul she is. Yeah.
She is, and she talks about sparkling and magical. And I was like, that's exactly the reason. That's what I saw in her. I'm like, how rare is it to meet someone that's such a breath of fresh air, but somebody that is so um living in a way and it's funny, she talks in terms of energy and it's true. I see the sparkle and I see the magic, those are worthwhile terms. And I really reflected on that conversation because we come from very different worldviews. Like she didn't grow up in the church. I didn't really grow up in the church, but I got acclimated. They dunked me and I got dunked. But I learned the Christianese and all that stuff to be acceptable in this community. And it's interesting when you engage with somebody who's really curious. And so with that, Steve, I just I had a thought. And I wanted to show you something that I think would be really helpful for at least our first hour, even though we're 22 minutes into it. But it really fits into this idea of what you've done for me. So I was in the shower fixing my hair and I saw this picture. And so I pulled some images together and I put this together. Okay. And the thing that came to me was this idea of the quote that everybody in this world has heard, and that is, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And this is the picture. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's two people, and these two people are looking at the world. From my perspective, I'd call it you're looking at creation, right? But, for someone on the left here is looking at the world just like the person on the right's looking at the world. And they're going, hey, how does this thing work? And it may be as simple as how do you make friends? It may be as simple as how do you get a job? It may be as simple as how do you read the TAT leaves to see if it's going to go up into the right, bro? But at the end of the day, you're trying to understand how it functions and how you relate to its functioning. But what's really interesting is I also reflected on the very nature of the civilized society. And I think about historically, the first writings that we have that we know of are Sumerian cuneiform tablets. And we didn't know how to, translate those until we saw the Rosetta Stone. And what's interesting is if you go back into all of written history and then you fast forward to today, a lot of what we have is actually built on the back of historical documents. And there have been some fundamental things that people said, hey, this is really important and you need to remember this. And I can't help but think of the Jews in the Passover, right? I'm sure there were some kids that were born after they got into the promised land and like, why are you guys so like worked up about this whole thing? And the older people are like, hey, I want to remind you, we're going to eat this meal. Why? Because we came out of Egypt. Before you came here, you punk ass kid, we were in slavery.
Right.
And we literally walked across the Red Sea and then it like fell onto the other people. And we're doing that today, right? The Passover meal. We're like, hey, We were once slaves and God rescued us. He redeemed us. So I want to kind of talk about that in this context because so many young people today are looking at the world just like anyone else is looking at the world and going, man,
Yeah.
there's a lot changing, Steve. And so
Yeah.
this is like a big old softball pitch that we could spend like 50 hours on.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I'm going to go back to the picture we talk about so often in Mark chapter 4. The where Jesus started the what we call parables now, but um, when he started by saying, "Listen to this," and the whole idea behind that word "listening" is to listen, to hear, to perceive, inwardly what is going on. In other words, it's not just listen so you can regurgitate, or it's a much deeper kind of word. And so he tells the story, an agricultural story to an agricultural community, and the multitudes leave. Oh, we got that. Great reminder. Yep, I've got to be more diligent. God made this to where there was going to be an abundance. Yep, I understand what the challenges are and what are some of the things that are going to compete against this bountiful return we're going to get. And yeah, thank you for that, Jesus. Thank you for the reminder. And they went home, and guess what? I bet you most of them were going to be diligent with getting up the next day to do a better job of sowing their fields and taking care of their fields. But then there were a handful of them, as we've talked about, that pursued Jesus and said, "Hey, man, we know you got something else up your sleeve. What are you talking about?" Well, somehow we get the impression you're not just talking about an agricultural lesson. You're not just teaching us how to get a bumper crop. What are you thinking?
There's something more here.
Yeah, man, we can feel in our bones. We're interested as can be. We have no clue what it is, but I bet you know, Jesus. What are you thinking, man? And he says, "Oh, to you it has been given to understand the mysteries of the kingdom of God, while the others remain outside and receive everything in parables." What a profound answer. Now, just take a few minutes to unpack that one.
Yeah. There's so
Well,
much
guess what?
there.
Yeah, well, guess what those two people looking at the world are looking for? They're saying, how's this thing work?
Yeah.
Wherever their area of need or interest or concern might be, how does this thing really work? What's going on? Whitney mentioned it a number of times, right? The old dark systems are fading away. There are new light systems coming up. Well, she doesn't use the vocabulary of, most of us gray hairs. But the point is, she's interested. Well, isn't that where she actually started?
Yeah.
I wanted to know more.
Hmm.
I wanted to know more. Well, guess what? That's a searcher. That's somebody who's interested. And so the path that she's taken has answered a lot of her questions without giving her the answer to the source of all the things that she perceives is right versus what is wrong. And so she continues to search. She'll get there. And when she gets there, she's going to get to a person. She's not going to get to a system or a thing. She's going to get to a person. And in my view, what everything I heard about it was when Jesus calls, she's going to answer because she is a legitimate truth seeker.
Yeah.
And so, guess what? Those two people, when they look at the planet, they're going to look at the planet as if the planet is going to speak to them, and it will. Or they can step back and say, "Hey, man, somebody built this planet. I think I'd like to talk to that dude."
Yeah.
I'll bet that's the guy who I need to talk to, the one who built it. Okay? And so that kind of just describes all of us. Are we going to look at the planet and expect us to teach us about itself, which it will do? Or isn't there a better way, which is to take a step back and ask the guy who actually built it?
Yeah.
Okay?
Wow. There's I often see this repeat itself is people worshiping the creation versus the creator.
Yeah.
And I've like I went through this era of arguing with flat earthers, and what was interesting is we just kind of agreed to disagree. I mean, I just didn't have the time or interest to try to argue the case for a globe. But what it was interesting is it just became apparent to me, why would I worship the creation versus the creator? Because the one thing we had in common was the fact that we agreed that there was a creator of whatever shape this thing is.
Yeah.
And when you start getting to that point, it's interesting. And I think one of the challenges is I always feel like Christian folks, the people that are like,
Mhm.
eager beavers, it's like they want to get married before courtship. Right? They're like, "Hey, let's get married." I'm like, "Well, no, you don't get married to somebody until you, like, know them,
Yeah.
unless I guess it's an arranged marriage." And it feels like it's out of joint, it's out of order. And I love what you're saying because what's packed in that agricultural story of those who chased after him was, in a way, what I would consider to be the church,
Hmm.
right? We think of church in terms of a building, but also in that story, he called them the called out ones. Like,
Yeah.
what makes you called out? And that's another thing that I think about is like, did you decide that you were super interested? Well, I think you applied some effort to like seeking it. But what made you? What drew you? What made you? You were made a certain way to go all the way to the top in baseball.
Yeah.
Well, I would say there's a lot of those elements of who God made you to be that have made you go this distance with Him. It's not by accident.
Well, yeah, there's, and I will, blend concepts here a little bit. Um, to play at the major league level, you are literally in a 1% category. You are less than 1% of the not just general population, but even the population that enjoys playing that game. Now, most of the other 99 percenters look at that and say, oh, that's because you had great physical ability.
Yeah.
See, so there is a perception about those who play at that level. And by the way, I can say the same thing in areas of business or in science or in literature or in the art. Anyway, anyone who reaches the top 1%, it's not just because of their talent or even good fortune, as the other 99% might perceive it. It's no, you are wired and built a particular way, and then it's up to you to exercise the various choices driven by interest as to whether or not you want to commit the kind of discipline and effort that's required to perfect your craft. And so it's not just physical ability, it's just not opportunity. There is a commitment to perfecting your craft. You're just not any longer interested in playing. You're interested in playing at a level that can compete at the highest level. And to do that, you have to be driven by a intense commitment to perfect your craft. Not everybody's willing to do that. I can tell you many a story where there were guys that had way more physical ability than I had, but they didn't make it past, the first or second year because the mental strain that challenge your internal fortitude to continue to press on in the face of overwhelming competitive resistance. And that's what it is, competitive resistance. The guys across across from you have the same interest, intention, desire, and skill that you have. By the way, you never experienced that before where you came from. You never experienced an entire opposing team that was as good as you or better. So guess what that opposing team is doing? Through their competitive resistance, they're challenging your own commitment to perfecting your class and perfecting your craft and perfecting your mental and creating your mental fortitude to endure against overwhelming opposition. Well, that's what a one percenter does. Now, is it because does the one percenter better than everybody else? I would say no. I would just say that's the role they're designed to play, because at that level of competitive interplay, they have to possess those attributes. Otherwise, they're going to get their butts handed to them. Well, okay. Is that a physical example of what happens in a spiritual dimension, a spiritual world? And my experience is absolutely. My physical training prepared me for the spiritual reality that accompanied the life I was given to live. Heaven and earth are operating simultaneous in me, and both have competitive resistors. Those who are trying to compete with me and the God whom I serve in order to assert their will over me and my God. Well, what am I going to do? Am I going to cower in fear because that guy throws a yak that I've never seen before? That's baseball jargon for a curveball. You know, he throws a yak, drops off the table. I look at it and I go, like I did when I was 10 years old, and go, man, who could ever hit that thing? Well, that was a competitive resistance. That guy was intending to exercise his skill to get me out, and he did a really good job at it.
Yep.
Now, what am I going to do with that? Am I
Yep.
going to take that and cower? Or am I going to take that and learn from it and say, okay, next time you throw that dude, I'm taking it right back at you. Well, not everybody has that mental attitude. And so Jesus not only has created us, but then it accompanies us in the development of the skills and attributes he's given to us so that we can play our position in life and deal with the competitive resistance that comes at us. And it's real.
Yeah.
And you don't know how real it is until you get in the game. And it's like, oh, wow, man, I just
Yeah.
thought this was a Sunday school lesson.
Yeah.
This isn't just a Sunday school lesson.
No.
This
No.
is how it works. My goodness, I better pay closer attention.
Well, and I think that's a really good, what a great, pause is to say, why are we doing this? And, if you think about it, there's a curiosity in both of us. You've journeyed longer than I have, but where does it lead? And, I look at, this image, right? This image, there's so much wrapped up in it for me,
Yes.
because I'm interested in so many things, Steve,
Yeah.
right? I'm the person on the left and I'm the person on the right.
Yeah.
And I think about, and I see this in so many people around the world, right? I listen to the physicists and I listen to the conspiracy theory people, and I listen to the artists and the musicians and all of these different people. I'm really just interested and curious. And people are recognizing things, right? We build billions of dollars of particle accelerators because we have a hunch that if we smash these things together, we might see the Higgs boson. And let's call that the God particle,
Yeah.
right? Well, what are we doing? And it makes me think, you know, we um we have this deep, deep desire to understand who we are and how we fit into this system. And I think that that's kind of a natural thing. And so you've got people that are coming from different perspectives. And I think in a kind of a liberal arts education, they want you to have a liberal understanding, meaning a wide view of kind of everything. Well, I think one of the things that's so important to me to point out here is that, are there lessons to learn from history? And there certainly are some lessons to learn from history. And so I want to make this case. If you knew that there was, and Whitney Magic brought this one up. She's like, yeah, the Akashic records, right? That there's this wisdom. I read the book years ago, Think and Grow Rich, and they talked
Mhm.
about infinite intelligence, right? Which was really more of a watered down version of God.
Yeah.
They just didn't want to, didn't want to push it as a religious thing, but said, hey, there is information and knowledge beyond you. And of course, that's what this Akashic record thing is as well. But what's interesting is we talked about lookalikes and we talked about a world that's upside down. And when I look at the historical, go all the way back to anything that we have that is an account. And there's a lot of different accounts, right? In the East, we have all kinds of accounts of Vishnu, right? And all of these different gods. We've got the Greek gods, we've got Roman gods, we've got all of these different kind of superhumans. We've got hybrid animal man things. We've got the Anunnaki. We've got all of this stuff historically that we look to. And it's interesting, if you take kind of world religions, a lot of what society reflects upon when it comes to kind of civilization is an underpinning of morality, of how should we function and survive, and how should we treat other people in this context. And I would say for the most part, there's this element of civility. Like, how do we live without killing each other? Because once you're dead, you can't really control or choose many things. So you see that. Well, as you learn the different views and you learn the different perspectives, and of course that's being highlighted right now when you look at um, this Hamas Israel thing. If you want to point it out, like these ideologies, right? And I think most Western people would say, does any group of people deserve to be eradicated on either side, right?
Yeah.
Would things be easier if Hamas didn't exist? I think the Israelis would say, yeah. And I would think that the Hamas kids that I watched say, all I want to do is stab Jews and run them over with my car. These are like 12-year-olds. That's
Yeah.
what they're taught. And there's something in us, regardless of what our background is, that says, you know what? That doesn't seem right. There's something amiss there. But this idea of historic information being relevant to not repeating issues of the past, we have to recognize that many of these things were passed on orally prior to the printing press. And I want to kind of wrap some big things that we've talked about over the last 25 episodes, is that in the modern church, we're lifting up this book that is a translation of an account. And one of the things I think is really powerful, and I used in that image this kind of scroll above someone's head. If you look at the basis for civilized society, and I would say, what is the result of kind of America? And I don't want to praise America right now as the current system to hold up,
Yeah.
but what are the fundamentals of this civilized society? And it's interesting when you look at and you peel back the Judeo-Christian ethic, right? And you think about, where does the law come from? And why is it important that we resolve disputes? Because if you think about what is the practical nature of the law in society, not the religious part of it, but the functional part. Well, we have disputes, and somebody's got to resolve them, and we got to agree that when we go through this process, that it actually is resolved. We've built our society on the back of these historical documents, and these folks, long before there was written documentation, would tell stories to their sons as they got up and walked along the path, that, hey, here's how things work. And here's how you can kind of survive maybe a little bit longer and have maybe a little bit more of a safe and secure life. I think without that context, if we just look at things in a modern perspective of saying, well, there's some people that are smashing electrons together and getting the Higgs boson, or it's the quantum, or it's AI, or it's transhumanism, or it's a modern view of technological things, that we're we're not looking at the author, we're looking at the creation, and we are looking actually at something that's trying to be a replacement or a lookalike for the genuine article.
Yeah.
And the genuine article, in my opinion, is the author. And without the context of understanding where does this whole thing come, where does this framework come from? Because if you remove people from the earth, like literally no people on the earth, and you just have animals, it functions pretty well.
Yeah.
And it functions in an abundant way. And it doesn't, I mean, there's some killing that happens, but it's not, um, the same hoarding and lording that I see. So I think that those that are interested, I think ultimately it's weird. It's almost like a pyramid. You have a group of people who might see, all right, I understand the context of this historical things, but it's almost like there's two people climbing ladders on either side and they're leaning together. And at the very, very top is a person and it leads them to the same place. I'm not saying it's a universal thing, but I almost feel like this is what I read in the Bible. The heavens declare.
Yeah.
You can't get away from the author and creator of this thing. No
Yeah.
matter how far you probe and deeply you dive, as you see the truth, you see him.
Yeah.
That's what I have to say about that.
and that's a lot. And that's it, man. It's
That's what I
his.
wanted to get across though in that whole thing
Yeah.
is that it's
Yes,
worth
absolutely.
it's worth probing.
Well, absolutely, Matt. I mean, in today's world, we hate the idea of binary. Okay. And we see it everywhere. We see, well, we don't want to be a man or a woman. We want to be an infinite variety of the male or the female.
Yep.
And yet, the appearance of the one who is rejecting their birth, gender is taking on the aspects of the opposite gender.
Yeah.
So the point is that you're still not escaping the binary.
Can I just say this? I have to say this. I was on Twitter last night, and somebody made this point that there was this vegan alternative food that was
Pepperoni.
made to look like chicken, and it had a wooden dowel through it to be like a bone. And the comment was, if you don't like meat, why would you create something that looks like meat?
Oh, I saw a similar thing on one of the cooking shows about it was vegan pepperoni, and the guy said, "Hey, man, if you're making vegan pepperoni, maybe you're not a vegan."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, like the tofurkey, that's another one. Anyway, I don't wanna bash vegans. I actually was a
No,
vegetarian for a while and saw some benefits from it, but
yeah, for sure.
it's so the irony of it. So anyway, I'm sorry, that made me laugh last night.
The irony of this, speaking of irony, is that we hate the idea of binary.
Yeah.
We absolutely despise it because in binary is simplicity, and the creation is, although it is infinitely complex from our point of view, it operates on a very simple premise: choose good or choose what is not good. What is not good is called evil, and what is good is called good. Well, okay, then what is good and evil? So you go into the garden from a scriptural point of view. Where is the binary? Okay, the binary is in. Okay, you have two trees. One tree is going to tell you that is going to promise you that you're going to be able to choose right and wrong, good and evil, all by your lonesome. That you're going to have the capacity, like God, to choose that all by yourself. The other is it promises you life. And so here is the deal: you can feast on the tree of life as much as you want, for I have created all things to perpetuate and to nourish life. Feast away. My advice is not to mess with that tree of good knowledge of good and evil, because it's going to promise you one thing but deliver another. Well, guess what? You can deal with that. The two people looking at that from a distance, there was a point in time that Adam and Eve were looking at those two trees with the exact same questions in their mind that in your little picture illustration. They're looking at the trees. They're going, now tree of knowledge of good and evil, right at smack in the center of the garden. Man, I cannot even escape this thing. I can't hide it because everywhere I turn to look, it's right there, right in the middle. I'm staring at it every time I do something. And what it's doing is that competitive resistance that's saying, okay, I've told you what's up. I told you how this is going to work. What is your choice? You have a binary choice. And the binary choice is to either accept what I say or reject it and make your own choice. That's binary. There's a story in the New Testament about, we call it the rich young ruler, who came and chased Jesus down. Wow, that kind of sounds like the Mark IV
Yep.
example. Chased him down and said, "Good teacher, what must I do to be saved?" And Jesus says, "Why do you call me good? There is only one who is good. But if you want to know, how to be saved, then do all the things that are written in the book." And the guy said, "Man, I've done all the things written in the book and I'm still shooting blanks, man. It ain't happening." And Jesus said, "Okay, you really want to know what's going on? Sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and come follow me." Oh man, the guy went away, said, "I can't do that," because he was a man of great wealth, yada, yada, yada. For those who understand the story, what was the man missing? He had all things material, had every material thing he could ever want. He had executed every religious requirement placed upon him. And still, he recognized he was missing something. And so, what did Jesus say? What you're missing is me. I'm what you're missing. If you'll rid yourself of all of the distractions in his particular case, because the competitive resistance for him was his great wealth that was competing against his great need. Which do you choose? It's a binary choice. In his particular case is, are you preferring to keep your great wealth that provides you great privilege, or are you really interested in solving the great hunger that is within you that your wealth cannot satisfy? Which do you choose? He made his choice. Now, did Jesus condemn the guy? He didn't condemn the guy. He just let him make his choice, because he built the creation to operate on a binary choice. See? Are you going to choose good? And who is good? There's only one good, God alone. What is of and from God is good. Everything else is evil. Which do you choose? It's a binary choice. We hate binary choices today. And yet, that's what provides us with the simplicity of the things that, of the challenges that face us. In the example I was sharing about, competitive resistance, you're constantly faced at the major league level of professional sports with a choice. Am I going to show up for one more play? Am I going to show up for one more play? Am I going to show up for one more play? It's a binary choice. Yes or no. And guess what? Sometimes guys get to the no answer.
Yep. You want to take this to a whole deep level. Is we've talked many times about the double slit experiment. And what's really amazing is the further people have looked into the very, very small, which, the smallest we're looking at least right now, is the quantum level. And so as we drill down and drill down and drill down, what have we noticed? We've noticed this thing that is a paradox or a mystery. And it is most well illustrated in the double slit experiment, where when we're not paying attention to it, it's a wave. And when we pay attention to it and observe it, it collapses into a particle. And so a lot of extensive research has been done on this. And it's amazing because it looks like these photons that were, entangled actually go back in time and change their decision. But what's really at the fundamental level of this, and this is not religious at all, it's the scientific world drilling into the creation and trying to understand it. And you know what's come out of that? Quantum computing.
Hmm.
The very nature of quantum computing is a binary choice. And I don't mean it's binary, it's even better than binary. It's a function of your observation. The very nature of who you are determines its state. So it's in all states at once until you make a choice to observe it. And when you think about this idea of, well, yeah, we have free will, you have no idea how powerful your free will is.
Absolutely.
So often we've put it at the bottom of the pyramid, right? We thought the natural world is everything above. But I want to remind people, the nerds that are out there, think about how gaming works. I'm really interested in, I've followed technology, especially as it relates to resolution, in imagery, in compression, in video, in all of this, right? And so one of the things that I've followed is, I've played video games since I was a kid, and they were not good, right? It was Pong, right? It was like a square pixels and a square pixel, and you moved it around. And now where are we? Well, now we've got Unreal Engine 5.3, and we've got this luminosity. Well, how do we create now certain games? Well, what we do is there's a series of polygons. And so we take the observer. And so let's say this is a first person shooter game. And it's the perspective of the person who is observing the environment. And in order to preserve resources, we only render that which you're looking at. Okay, so think about this. We are creating like the creator created. When we look at the double slit experiment, it collapses upon our conscious observation. Well, when we build systems, we try to preserve our resources. And so what we end up doing is we say, okay, way, 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 way off in the distance is a tree. Well, that tree, because it's not in focus for the observer, we're going to have a representation of. The series of polygons that's required to render at this distance is like 10.
Hmm.
But let's say the user decides he wants to go over and check out that tree. In fact, he wants to use his fancy hatchet to cut it down. We do not render the inside of that tree and the wood until the hatchet comes out. And what's really amazing about the nature of how we create and how the physical systems of this world that we observe are happening is that it is actually a component of the created person. And so and this really goes back to the whole Elohim thing, Steve, that connects all of it back.
Yes.
It's this idea that, well, why is it that you show up for the next play? Why is that when you cross that chalk, everything goes quiet? Why is it that, Steve, you know what? I went to Boys State as a junior in high school, and I got booed and laughed off the stage.
Hmm.
I ran for governor, and it was humiliating, Steve. And I sat for the rest of that camp out on the basketball court, and I said to myself, wherever I go to college, I'm going to be student body president. And I was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? Because I decided that. And of course, you got all kinds of self-help and all this kind of stuff. But the big thing that is really, I'm speaking to the choir and to myself in this scenario, is what do you want? And the thing that's interesting about it is, are you aligning yourself with the nature and character of the creation, because there is a framework on which it is built. And I think what's incredible is, what is it, John 15:5, 5:15? Without me, you can do nothing.
Nothing.
And you think about this, well, then that means that with you, I can do everything.
Yeah.
And that's so like, wow. Wow. And it's, it just seems like it keeps on repeating and repeating and repeating. And it's like, what do we see? The tree looks, or the leaf looks like the tree, this infinite resolution that we see God in all things. And that if we align ourselves with his framework in creation, which is literally declaring to us who he is and what it is, and it's so grand. I mean, light travels at 186,000 miles per second.
Yeah.
We can observe galaxies that are 380 million light years across. Light takes 380 million years to get across the Sombrero galaxy.
Yeah.
And that's one of a billion galaxies.
Yeah.
And we go, the heavens declare. So to think that I certainly am not saying that, hey, I understand how it all works, but there's something that I've seen that if I align myself with the very nature of its framework, and I consider the historical knowledge that's been preserved that says, hey, there's a guy, he's alive, he speaks, and he knows all. Well, what if I tried this on for size? What if I actually understood who he created me to be, and I like walked with him in this? It's very logical, but it's also very simple, but so difficult because we are in this world where we think we are gods, that we think that we can do it. We go our own way because we have that element of him in us, that we are actually powerful, if you will. But it's like, well, without me, you can do nothing. How do you square that stuff? Because I know there's a lot there that you have to say.
No, I mean, you have an audience for a reason, Matt, because you have a way, like Joe was talking last week, of articulating things that resonate with people, that provides them with a vocabulary that helps them, consider things. Um, you know, the way you were talking about, the wave then collapsing to the particle. Well, isn't that exactly what vision does?
Yeah.
You know, you have a vision about something in your mind's eye. You see it. You set your eyes upon it. You start uh, paying attention to it. You start acting upon it, and what eventually happens? The thing that was intangible eventually takes on tangible expression.
Yeah.
That's the creation. That's Hebrews 11. You know, by faith, we understand this little packet of power that Jesus sends when he speaks to us, enables us to understand how the creation even came to be. The Father had a vision, and guess what he began to do? He set his eye upon it and he said, Son, let's do this. And the next thing you know, some period of time later, we're standing on the planet talking about how once we see something that is intangible, we set our gaze upon it, we
Yes.
put our intention, we choose to act on it, and before you know it, I'm a student body president.
Yep.
How in the world does that work? That's how I've created, and it all began with a binary choice:
Yep.
yes or no, yes or no. Will you? Won't you? What's fascinating, again, back to your little picture, is we look at whatever it is that we are a part of on the planet, and like the story in Mark 4, we can decide for ourselves how we're going to not only view but then relate to that planet. Some people deal with it on their own. They say, okay, I'm going to figure this out all by myself. I don't want any other inputs. I'm just going to tackle it all by my lonesome. Guess what? That's a binary choice. I'm going to do it alone, or I'm going to do it with something or someone else. Binary choice. There are others who look at it through the prism or lens of something. That's the scroll that's a little bit, above the gal's head. Okay, is she going to look at the planet through the lens of that scroll? Oh, by the way, we call that God. I mean, so we call that the Bible inside the religious system. And I'll get to the religion thing in a minute. See, so we look at the planet through the lens of some document, some experience that someone else had on the planet, and then we view the planet through their experience. Well, we do that all the time inside the church when we look through the lens of the Bible. Well, there's a third one that's not represented there, and that is looking at the planet through the lens of the one who created it. And guess what? That's a binary choice too. Same thing. That's a waveform until we set our eyes and our intention upon it and exercise our choice to say, will you teach me how to do that? And eventually what begins to happen, it collapses into a particle form. And you begin to see the particles in the way the particle designer created them to function. And it is mind blowing. It is, wow, this is so simple. In the beauty of its simplicity, there is infinite complexity that creates this thing into something that I had no idea existed.
Well, Steve, let me ask you this. There seems to be a lot of flexibility, and there seems to be, I think on one hand, you think about what are you called to, what are you wired for, what are you gifted at? You know, I can't play the piano very well, Steve.
No.
Now could I learn potentially, but there are people who have a certain facility for that is just outstanding, right? They just,
Yes.
and of course you see that with talent as well and gifting and all that. And when you've met someone who's like, okay, this person is doing exactly what they were made to
Yeah.
do. I
Yeah.
had a buddy who was a musician. His brother was a musician, very well-known musician. And when I watched him on stage, I'm like, it is obvious to me that this is what this guy was made to do. I mean, it
Yes.
was like you saw God, right? Like you saw something really special there. You know, I wanna dig into that, but I wanna say hello to a couple people who have joined us. Hexy
Sure.
Quinn has joined us. I just wanna say
Really.
hello to her.
Yep.
Always great to have her here. Crypto Pez says, "I'm late, but I'm here. Looking forward to more pearls of wisdom about working with the creator. Highlight of my week." Thanks for being here, Crypto Pez.
Cool.
ID says, "What's up, Crypto Heartbeat and Steve? Hello, Texicans. Bearded Saint, um, the my buddy, who reminds me of my dad when he was young. Um, and so it's so good to have you guys here. Steve, you just mentioned this is so big. This is so big. And we're back to like the whole reason that we started this whole thing up.
Yeah.
I said to you, and that way I've condensed thing is you said to me so many times, Jesus is alive and he speaks. And I've tried that out on so many different people, right? And I've told that story. I said, it's really crazy when Jesus comes out of the wilderness and he's tempted by Satan himself, and he's like, nope, no, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. And then he's like, I don't do anything unless I see the Father doing it or saying it. And then the transfiguration, the guys are up there and he's like, this is my son, listen to him. And then we think about what is that scroll? What is that Bible?
Yeah.
Right? What is that account? People thought that this was so important that there's a group of people over a long period of time that literally sat alone and made sure that the words were written down correctly to the
Yeah.
best of their ability.
Yes.
That they wanted to, this was so important that you would have reference of this, that they would ink that account.
Yes.
And you think of, whether it's John on the island of Patmos with Revelation, right? Seeing this vision and passing this thing along, and it being said that there would not be a single, letter that would be changed. That there is something really important about this account. And that what are we doing here, Steve? I'm not writing scripture with my voice on video, but I am promoting the account of one who is alive and who speaks. And what you said that just struck me was you took the analogy of the collapsing of the waveform and you said, that's actually what's going on. And you said to me in the early days, you go, why didn't you ask him yourself? I'm like, that seems kind of foreign. So are you really saying, Steve, that I should say to Jesus, hey, Jesus, these guys are talking about you speaking to them. And, I think I have a narrow view of what speech is. I think it's like audible words from the sky and like a harp and like clouds and maybe like, a baby with a diaper. And what it sounds like to me is that you speak in many, many different, more broad ways. Will you teach me how to hear you? And will you teach me how to listen to you and to understand you? I'm interested in knowing that. And that collapses the waveform and becomes something that will blow your mind. I love that. That's the first time you've really and thanks for taking that analogy to that distance, but that is where it becomes tangible. And now you think about what are the benefits of doing that? Like, what if we actually did that? What would it look like? Well, you've done that since, well, a long time. What is the fruit of it, Steve? What is the fruit? What is the result? Are you a super rich guy? Are you the richest guy in the world, Steve? Are you richer than Elon Musk? And is that what Jesus gives? Is that what he's awarding to people who seek him? What is the fruit of listening to the one who created it all?
You start becoming one with him. And when you start becoming one with him, it's exactly what Jesus described in John 17. When he said, hey, thank you, Father, I and me, you and me, them in us. You start, and if I use the waveform,
Yeah.
setting your eyes on a collapse, what happens is you see it. There's all kinds of scriptures that talk about, in fact, John actually said, we become as the one upon whom we gaze. See, set your gaze upon him. Why? Because it changes back to the analogy of the waveform. What you see now converts to wave, collapses into the particle. That particle creates something, and what does it create? A oneness with the very one who created you. And let me tell you what, there is no physical element that can even begin to remotely compare to that. Yes, there are all kinds of things on this planet that we need. The planet has been made into a consumer. We are consumer products. We are consumers, and so we need nourishment. Jesus isn't denying the need for nourishment. What he is describing is how the nourishment continues to not only nourish, but remains nourishing. Okay? That can only happen when you're listening to the one who speaks. Because when he speaks, he then shows you how to not only view it, but then viewing it, then it turning into, again, your picture, into a particle that is created in order to provide nourishment to those who are around. That's the free flowing of the design that God created. And so what's the payoff? Man, you get to enter into the reality of what he designed. And not only what he designed from a thing, but enter into it with him in the design. Matt, that's why we talk about these things.
Yeah.
See, one of the very clever misdirections that the kingdom of darkness created was to convert God to a religious icon. You heard it yesterday when you asked Whitney about, how do you see this source? Is that someone you would call God? And in her sweet way, she said, hey, I don't see myself as a religious person. Now think about that for a second. Here is one who is seeking what is true. She has taken a path with everything in her to discover what is true. and she's getting a glimpse of light, and it's just exhilarating her.
Yeah.
And what does she say? I'm not a religious person. She is reflecting our training that God is relegated to a religious experience. Well, you've been a president of a company. It, when you put together your business plan and you had people to join you in in achieving the vision that was represented in that business plan, did you classify that as a religious experience? Well, no, it's just how it works.
Right.
Okay? God isn't a religious person. I mean, we talked about this again many, many times. Okay, we're going to get to heaven you know, say, welcome aboard, Christians. Well, Jesus, are you a Christian? No. Well, why not? Why aren't you a Christian? Father, are you a Christian? What? Well, Steve, why are you one? I don't have an answer for that. See? Well, Steve, you think it's a good idea to maybe think about that? Well, yeah. Guess what? Now you start stepping back, and what happens is you start realizing the the charade that is projected that redefines who God is to relegate him to a religious experience. Well, once he's relegated to a religious experience, what is he excluded from? We got a word for that too. We call it secular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. So let's go ahead and play the game. So that sounds to me like a binary choice. Okay. So where do we go from here then?
Yep.
So, there one of the payoffs that begin to happen is all of the charades start getting dismantled from the way that you think and perceive. And you start moving into a liberty that says, oh, okay, I see how this works. Oh, yeah. Israel and Hamas, yeah, what's going on there? Yeah, it does not matter the historical view because each person is trained, in thinking a particular way. So guess what? Each person is given a good or evil choice. It's binary. It's not the issue that it's not binary. It's that good and evil is redefined.
Yeah.
So okay, who's doing the redefining and who benefits from that redefinition? Hey, well, I'd like to know about that. Oh, now we're talking about the lookalikes that you're describing earlier. Oh, now we got a challenge with dealing with the lookalikes.
Well,
What are the
and
lookalikes?
well,
Yeah,
and okay, and so to wrap that into or to look at it a different way, when you think about so many things are driven by incentive, and we I jokingly said, "Hey, Steve, are you richer than Elon Musk?" And of course that's tongue in cheek in the sense that the assumption is that this God that we know and serve, his currency isn't, you know, money. What's amazing though is that you think of this term, which is so encapsulated as a peace that transcends all understanding. And so, what is that? What is this thing that you can't understand? Like, we are incapable of understanding it. Now, we can use language the best that we can, and I can make a case and say, Steve, it's like this crazy, like holy addiction. It's like the greatest drug. It's the greatest thing I've ever experienced, but it's like goodness, but I don't have the words. I got about 2% of the ability to communicate what it is. That's why it transcends all understanding. And I think about the incentives, right? And where is the source of lookalikes come from? Well, it comes from placing something as a replacement or in the place of the true benefits of choosing the one who created it all. And so what I see out there in this world is it's like replacing a lie for the truth. It's basically saying, okay, for example, let's go do DMT, Steve. You know what DMT is?
I'm not sure.
Okay, good. I'm
Yep.
glad you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, DMT is this it's this drug that you take, and what people have reported from this hallucinogenic drug, which is extremely potent, is that literally you're separated from your very ego. Like you are literally
Mm,
like destroyed, shot up into the air, separated from your ego, and you meet entities.
mm,
Okay. And there's a whole group of people. And think about this. We talk about the Akashic records. I drilled into that because I was interested. What is Whitney channeling? And I read into the history of the Akashic record. And guess what? In order for you to engage with the Akashic record, you have to ask permission. Well, we did a whole series on authority. And
yeah.
so if you go in through this DMT thing and you see these entities, you start engaging with these things. And a lot of people think, well, no, we're just alone here. I'm a descendant of a monkey. And if I do some drugs, maybe I'll meet some people that have some knowledge. Well, what did the kingdom of darkness, Satan himself, say to Jesus when he came out of the wilderness? If you'll just give me this authority and basically bow before me, I'll give you all of this.
Yeah.
And so in this world that we live in, people have accepted this lie and they've said, you know what, I'll take this because this is power. And so many people across our planet have said, you know what, this is good. And there's a really interesting illustration of this that'll give you chills if you watch it. And there was Jerry Seinfeld
Mm,
did comedians in cars having coffee, and it
yeah.
was a web series. And he was with who's the comedian that did Delirious? What's his name? He was in Welcome to America. I'm sure somebody will know in the chat. And he was sitting with him in the car, and he was talking about the Rat Pack from back in the day, right? And he literally, they were just talking about, that those times and those guys, and we're talking about Las Vegas and everything. And it was amazing how one of those guys said to him, he said, the devil is as strong as God.
Mm,
And it was Eddie Murphy, and Eddie Murphy was freaked out. He's like, this guy just came up to me and said, hey, by the way, Satan is as strong as God. And it was really, really interesting. Like when I heard this, I was like,
mhm.
really? Is this what's going on in the background? And I think a lot of people, are like in the usual suspects world. Well, the greatest lie the devil ever, did was to convince people he didn't exist. And then there's a group of people who have said, look, I have been able to trade with this one who's as strong as God, and he gives me power. And so I see all of these things, and you start seeing it, and you're like, you have to go in and get permission to enter this hall of records, and it gives you power. And then think about what we're seeing. There's some news coming out that there are documents that Eisenhower made deals with the aliens. And I know
Mm,
that sounds so crazy, right? Well, that's going to be disclosed that there was this interaction with another species of potentially Elohim who they made a deal with. And, in that deal was an exchange for power, an exchange for technology, and an exchange for something. And you see this over and over and over again, that we would give up our authority for power. And to say that it isn't real and it doesn't exist, I think we're about to see it in living color, that these things that have been hidden for a time are going to be revealed again for what they are. And when we see things like Jesus in the man who's been literally possessed by demons known as Legion, many of these, that literally it's real. And there are hosts that have to be, but that's the thing we talked about in the garden and everything. And so it's amazing to me that we have to be cautious to recognize that this is the mechanism. Why does the evil, darkness, why does it care about us at all? Because it needs something from us. It needs our permission, which is our authority. Can you speak to that, of how significant that mechanism is for really the creation of these lookalikes? I'm going to show you something that you think is God and gives you power, and I'm going to incentivize you to give your authority to me.
Well, to me, that's the greatest lie is you know, in the usual suspects, that's, if you get into that, that's really an exchange between the devil and the church. That's what it's symbolically showing. And the church is, through Palomar, the detective, he is positioning himself in ascendancy over and smarter than verbal, while verbal is manipulating him all around through the appearance of his weakness. And yet, to all who are then telling the story, they're describing the almost um, infinite and indescribable power of Kobayashi. Am I
Yeah.
remembering his name?
Kobayashi, yeah.
Yeah, correctly. Um, and that's what it is. On the one hand, there's an appearance of things. On the other, there is something much bigger that's going on. But it's all about manipulation. It's all about taking what is true and making it appear to be true while there's nothing true about it. And so when you look at the dynamics of these, we are constantly looking through a prism of the lie and not recognizing what is true. Let's go back to the rich young ruler. To him, there was a truth in him that he could not escape, and that is something was lacking in his life that threatened in his view and training, threatened not only his present well-being but his eternal well-being. Thus the request, what must I do to be saved? I am in danger. There is something threatening my life. I need to be brought into safety. What must I do to transition from this threat to where it is safe? And so, as we described, okay, let's look through the lens of your religious upbringing. How's that working for you? Well, I've done it all and nothing's working.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, let's move. So now what you've had a chance to see is recognize, again, a truth from evil, a good from evil. Okay. Well, then here's what you need to do. Get rid of all that you possess, give it to the poor because they really need it. That's the nature, my nature and character being expressed in you. And then come follow me. I am what you need. Well, guess what he said? No, I can't do that. Why? Because he was a man of great wealth. So look at the lie. So he's looking through the prism of what is appearing to be wealth as a view to looking to the truth of what is wealth. Well, did Jesus ever go without a meal? What did he do when the threat of the storm came? What did he need to do? What did he do when he needed to get to the other side quickly? What did he do with the man who was so crippled up, all he could do was lay in a bed and needed his friends to dig a hole through the roof to get him there? What did he do with the guy who couldn't see, so he was totally rendered inoperable as he sat on the side of the road and cried out, King of David, Son of David, excuse me? What did he do? Was there anything that Jesus lacked that was not at his immediate disposal to meet whatever the need and the mission was in the moment? No. No. You are not giving up in order to enter lack. You're giving up in order to enter into an abundance that is indescribable, that has no lack. So when you ask me about, in fun, am I richer than Elon Musk? The answer is yes, absolutely,
That's right.
because I am joined to the one who owns it all. And whatever is needed to accomplish in the moment, there is no lack of resource to get that done. Okay? That's what is true. Now, does Jesus bargain with us? No, he simply says, hey, man, you want to follow me? You want to participate? You want to do this together, man? It's a really cool deal if you want to hook on. No, but what do the powers of darkness do? They don't have infinite resources. They have been given certain information in order to make effective their mission for being created, the reason for being created, but they do not possess authority to rule. So they must bargain and trade with us. And what do they trade with? Technology.
Power.
Money. Power. Ah, the things that are minuscule in comparison to seeing the waveform, it collapsing into a particle and then being able to create something out of that. They do not have the ability to do that.
Yep.
It's not within their makeup because they're not among the Elohim class. And once that realization strikes you,
Yeah.
it's not religious, it's not ethereal, it is just true.
Yep.
And it's like, wow, Lord, that is amazing. So part of this stream and what we're talking about is, hey, folks, there's a change coming on.
Yeah.
It is in the works. And there's going to be a binary choice. And it's not like the binary choice you're talked about in your religious environments. It's a binary choice whether you want to play and be in the game or not. Your choice.
Well, and think about what's happening in the world, Steve. All of these things are heating up,
Yeah.
and we're in this crisis era, and here we are. The money's changing, right? Crypto channel money's changing, and then there's people like Whitney Magic. I love it.
Yeah.
She's like, I see these things shifting from darkness to light. I see darkness collapsing. I see it eroding. Don't give it energy, which is so awesome for her to say that, because you said that exact same thing.
Yeah.
And this idea that, this is what God's doing. He doesn't just say, well, I'm only going to work with the Baptists. No, he is revealing himself because the heavens declare. In all of these things, he's making himself known. But I think the important thing to know as far as discernment is concerned, you say, trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understandings. Well, what are our own understandings except I'm searching around for my way that's going to serve my needs and the way I want to do things. And what you run up against is lookalikes that will exchange your authority for power.
Yes.
And that's what we see in this idea of like, well, yeah, is the spiritual realm wrought with information and knowledge and power? Yeah. And you can exchange for it. I mean, I think probably the quintessential model of this has been at the crossroads, right? We know the story of the man at the crossroads who trades his soul for the ability to play the blues.
Yeah.
And that story is why, I mean, Charlie Daniels wrote about it, right? The devil went down to Georgia.
Yeah.
And it's like, what would I trade? Well, what do I get? Well, you have to trade your soul for this, fame or whatever it may be. And of course, you see people in their desire to achieve. I remember seeing Tom Brady. I think he won the 4th ring, and he was just like, I'm empty, And I was like, hold on a second. There are kids all over that are idolizing you, and you are broken and lost, and you're depressed. And you're like, hold on, this world, I do not give as the world gives.
Yeah.
And I think that that's such a powerful thing, is to say, why are we doing this? Have I arrived? No. Do I experience the joy of it? Yes. Am I learning? Yes. Is it an unbelievable journey? Yes. But I think it speaks to the very nature of all of us, this desire to be known, this desire to have purpose, this desire to feel like we matter. And I think what's incredible, I've said this many times, but I remember in chemistry class in high school, they had those like Tinker toys. Remember those, like you'd plug together the bonds,
Yeah.
And you could make these things that look like they were, sticking out all over. And it makes me think of Rice University. They discovered carbon 60, which is the buckyball. They called it the buckyball. It was carbon 60, and it's hexagon, actually. The hexagons that form what is essentially a soccer ball. A soccer ball is hexagons connected together, and it's the strongest material, stronger than diamond. And it is essentially a lattice that is folded in on itself and has become a ball. Now, if it's in a tube, it's a carbon nanotube. That's carbon 70. Carbon 60 is 60 bonds, and it is like the greatest, material when it comes to strength. What I look at and I think about Jesus in my life, I can maybe connect one or two bonds, right? Let's say there are 60. I can connect this one here. I can go here and have this kind of joy. I can do these drugs, or I can have this relationship, or I can go gamble, or I can get a dopamine hit from this, or I can go to the racetrack, or I can whatever it may be. And I can kind of it satiate myself for a period of time. But I feel like this journey where I've said, all right, less of me, more of you. What do you have for me? And what I see is not only do all 60 get connected at once, but then they're connected like it's almost like it's an abundant overflowing that splashes out on everyone. And you see it resonates. And I almost feel like whenever I meet people, at meetups or wherever it may be, they don't want to talk about crypto. And there's a reason for it. Is that because we're all, I think, pre-wired as Elohim men and women
Yeah.
to desire that peace that transcends all understanding, that rooted nature into the very nature and character of creation. And I keep coming back to the prodigal son to think that we're on this journey and that the one that loves us so much, this father, would finance our journey to debauchery only so that we could see him for his true nature and character and come back. And I feel like that's the thing. We've been wandering. I wandered and I'm like, yeah, I can connect a couple of these, Steve. But hold on a second. Where does it lead me to? And no wonder he says, the consequences of sin is death, because I continue to walk down this path on my own. And what ends up happening? It leads me down this really, really windy road. And it's like he said he'd make our path straight. It's amazing on one hand how simple it is, but it's almost we could talk about it till we're blue in the face. It's something you have to experience, and you can only experience by being interested.
Well, yeah. I mean, every person who will hear this stream and every other person out there is a one percenter to somebody. Somebody is looking for the unique experience that that person has that distinguishes them from every other person they know. They're a one percenter to somebody.
Yeah.
Well, how does that 1% need to be expressed in their view? What is the message that they're going to pass on to that person who needs that unique, one of a kind input from somebody? Well, in this particular, in the context of this stream, it's, hey, listen, folks, there's a whole lot more to this living thing than the bill of goods that we've been sold. Just pause and think for a minute. Okay. Why is crypto even here? Why is it here? Okay. Oh, it's a way to make a lot of money. It's an investment thing. Come on, think bigger than that. Step
Yeah.
back, take a look. Why is it even here? If the financial system was operating in the binary choice of good, would we even be talking about crypto?
No.
If the Fed was doing what it was doing to actually accomplish the mission of currency, which is to allow for a seamless engagement of trade, would we be messing with? No. So what is it saying to us? Oh, the existing system, Whitney's terms, is being saturated by darkness. All right. Well, if you were pulling the spiritual levels of that system, what would you be looking for? If the person can see that it's collapsing, that it's full of corruption, that it's like the peach sitting on the table, what would you want to do? Would you want to try to keep it, revive it? Would you try to, resuscitate it, put it up? What would you do with it? Well, I think my assessment of what they would do is they would want to come up with another system that had more energy in it because the energy was dissipating in that old system. Everybody was beginning to see it. And one of the signs is this thing called crypto. The people where the real sovereignty resides are saying, no, 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 we're not. We see the tea leaves, we read the tea leaves, we see what's going on. All right, we need to come up with an entirely different mechanism. Well, if you were Satan himself, who's an economist, what would you do? Wouldn't you be trying to tap into those who had the creative and innovative ability to create a new system that you could control? And how would you package that? And then, as it was packaged, how would you know who was actually behind the architecture of that packaging? Because what you see instantly happening is the same players, and I'm not talking about individuals. Yes, it's happening through individuals, but the same dynamic is beginning to happen in the crypto world, which is to regain control over it. That mechanism of control.
Yep.
See, good teacher, what must I do to be saved? I got everything in the world that any other person in the world would see is all of it. What do I need to do? How do I escape this corruption? It's showing in me as anxiety. It's showing in me as, all kinds of stuff. I cannot even get a good night's sleep because I'm so jacked up about this thing. I know I'm in trouble. I don't know what else to do. Well, it's a binary choice, dude. Really simple.
And it's interesting, if we lay over that thinking into this pulse chain ecosystem, I want people to hear, those of you who've been in the Richard Hart ecosystem, I want you to see this playing itself out. The origin of Bitcoin came out of the 2008 collapse. There was obviously the cypherpunks prior to that talking about how cryptography could potentially create a scenario in which there aren't centralized players or counterparties in money. It took the 2008 crisis for someone to have this alternative, and the Bitcoin white paper came out in 2009. And what it was about was really this idea of saying these centralized players who have control of the money, there's got to be a better way. So an alternative was born in 2009. We thought it was going to be peer-to-peer digital cash. It ended up turning kind of into a store of value or digital gold. What's happened ever since it's launched is that once people started taking it seriously, they tried gaining control. And so now all the hash power and all the mining, and now through ETFs and all of this stuff and consolidation of ownership, the powers that be are trying to hoard it. And so Bitcoin, in a way, is ultimately going to be sacrificed on the altar of decentralization because it's going to cease to be what it was created to be. And then one comes in that process named Richard Hart, who was double clicking the EXE icon, and he was getting 50 Bitcoin at a time. And what Richard Hart saw was influenced and inspired by the cypherpunks that, hey, yeah, this system is broken and we need an alternative to it. And so as time progressed, he said, we need to build a better Bitcoin because this thing is faulty. Let's take this into a mining analogy that's not based on energy consumption. Let's do it on people's ability to wait. So it was really, truly the first proof of stake. So it built upon this idea of decentralization, but it said, hang on, you have to hold your own keys. And I do not have control of this contract. It is immutable. There's no backdoor. There's no access. I can't monkey with it. Once it's a finished product. Why would I do that? Because that ensures that no centralized player can control this, which gives you more confidence that it could be a reliable system. And then what does he do from there? He says, you know what, without us having the infrastructure for us to build a new economic order and system, we have to have the rails to run on. And so a layer one of the pulse chain was created. But what's interesting is he twerked and did all of this outrage marketing and got his hand slapped by the SEC, which I think is a part of the design, so that he could then ultimately and finally prove that the function of you writing to the blockchain is actually your free speech. And that when you separate this and recognize that money is actually an extension of your own personal labor, and it's a reflection and a proxy of your creative ability, that when you write to that blockchain, that you are actually the author of creating value. And it speaks right to the very foundation of creating something from nothing. But that's the very nature of what our labor is. It is the only thing that exists, right? Goods and services. It's a proxy for human labor. And what's amazing to me is that's really the essence of all this, is that as this peach rots and as this system fails, which it is going to fail, the fact that God would see and draw people to something, even if they don't understand who the author of it is, that shows you, I will provide for you. And you know what it reminds me of, Steve? The Father saying to Adam and Eve, and I'm not, this is not a quote, we're going to have to kick you out of here. You did what you shouldn't have been doing. What have you done? Why have you covered yourselves while we were ashamed? And what did he do? And I think this is the most amazing thing, because in a way, the pulse chain may be the killing of animal skins for coverings that are provision for you as you journey out into this world. And I kick you out of this garden, but I do provide for you. And so to me, is the pulse chain the provision of God as the alternative system if we preserve it in its nature and character? Because you've said it so many times, these tools are neutral.
Yeah.
And in a way, why is it that this has been so successful? Because there is one who wants to animate it for good. He wants to animate it in the nature and character. Now, he would not communicate it this way. But as we take the responsibility of shepherding this system and we think about, well, how would we create this new system and what would we want it to reflect? Well, I would say we'd want it to reflect the nature and character of the one who created it all, meaning that it would be built to bless and protect, not to extract and enslave.
Well, look at again, going back to our, you know, the wave, looking at it, focusing on it, collapsing the particle, the then release of it of energy to materialize and consolidate those particles to create a manifested form, a tangible form. Uh, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happens. Is again Hebrews 11. By faith, this packet, we understand that the worlds were created not out of the things that are tangible, but intangible. The spoken word, the same one that Jesus, said to the devil in the temptation, the spoken word of God. That's how they were created. Well, what happened again, using your collapse? He has his vision. What is his vision? That his man would rule his creation with him in the fullness of his nature and character. Well, unpack that one for a minute.
Yeah.
That his man, okay, that did his man exist when he had his vision for creating? No. Would rule, okay. What does rule imply? Well, rule implies the exercise of authority over that which is jeopardizing the vision. Oh, that's man's rule. With him. What does with mean? Not on man's own accord, but in total consolidation, coordination, and oneness with the one who created him. How is he to then exercise that rule? With vengeance, with all of the non-anger? No, out of the fullness of his nature and character. I mean, there is so much packed in to that little vision statement. It just blows your mind. So then you look at this and you say, okay, what has been the result? He set his focus on the vision, the waveform. It collapsed into particles. He spoke them, and when he spoke them, they materialized. The particles consolidated together to create. Well, what did you just talk about? The case that you're describing for, with Richard and pulse change and all that stuff. It is free speech. Why? What is free speech? The speaking out of the vision collapsing into particles so that it can be spoken. That's the first expression of the tangible state of it. That then consolidates all the other particles to produce the outcome. Well, in whose nature and character is that to be? In the nature and character of the Father. To do what? To rule over those things that put his man in jeopardy. Well, guess what? We've talked about the folks in Philippines. We've talked about all the stuff that's happening there. What are we observing? We are observing the abuse of people that's jeopardizing what? The good that God intends for his man. So how then can crypto be used, if you will? Let's do that.
Yep.
See? Starting to give vision about, producing communities. All of a sudden, the waveforms that we see at a distance are now collapsing into particles that are then being spoken, that are then bringing the consolidation of those particles together to create a manifestation of good.
Wow.
Now, how are we to then animate that?
Yep.
In the good of his nature and character. Well, folks, I think that's where the game is.
It is.
Frankly,
It's gotta be, man. Well, and even to state it even another way, or maybe even more clearly, I've heard people say nothing that exists in this world, materially, has ever existed prior to being in the mind of a man or a woman.
Yeah.
Literally, you could pick up any tangible item that was created outside of like the earth and say, all right, this pen.
Yeah.
Someone at some point in time had in mind the plastic, the length, the fits in your pocket, the ink, the barrel, the design. There was a CAD drawing, there was a physical drawing, but it had to be here first. If you think about this, where does the idea come from? And so one of the things that's really fascinating right now when it comes to people thinking about consciousness is a lot of times because we're looking outside of eyeballs and we see this gray matter inside, we think that the origin of thoughts is the gray matter. And some people have said, if you think about this, and there's a lot of cases that you could make that would make a really good case for this, is that this gray matter is actually an antenna. And that antenna is actually tuned to, in our case, the one who is speaking.
Yeah.
And so ideas that might come. So you even want to get even further down there is, as you speak to the one who created, what is it? How do we have the desires of our hearts? Meaning he gives those to us. Well, what happens when those are divinely inspired? You say, Lord, what do you want me to create? Rather than just animate.
Yeah.
And to think that, okay, this idea, I can't tell you where it comes from. Let's assume that it comes from the spoken word of Jesus. Well, it comes out of my mouth. Well, what is vocal intonation? What is vocalizing something if it is not the vibration, the waveform of air?
Yeah.
And if you think about that, the vibration of air, I mean, you've been to a concert, the woofer is going boom, boom. What's interesting about the waveform collapsing is it becomes material.
Yeah.
So this idea that, okay, hold on, I'm picking up your waves, man. We're on the same wavelength, man.
Yeah.
And what am I doing? I'm literally saying, okay, you're going to make my path straight. Okay, what is it that you desire? And I think about this is that, one, it could be the animation of existing neutral objects. It could be the creation of new. But then as we think about how do they become material? Well, you probably knew at a very young age that you were going to be a professional baseball player, probably because you couldn't think of anything else.
Yeah.
I knew when I sat on that basketball court that I was going to be student body president. Why? I just knew it. And I made the decision to do it. And it's really interesting because these things merge, because you've got this new agey people are like, you can manifest it. Well, yeah, you can. But you do it outside of the nature and character of him. And what do? You end up selling your soul. You end up giving your authority away. You might attain power, but it's going to be built on a system of extraction. You align yourself with the one whose nature and character is to bless and protect. And folks, you got something that is really powerful. Now we look at this community within the pulse chain ecosystem. You say, hold on, we have someone who understands these basic principles, that his primary purpose isn't to lord and to hoard. It's not to extract value from you. It's actually to bless and protect you. And even though Richard wouldn't say those things, that's who he is. He is this strong leader who is working from these principles of advocacy, that you actually matter, that you shouldn't pick up pennies in front of freight trains, that you shouldn't literally nuke yourself by giving away your keys, that you should have the autonomy and the sovereignty to make your own binary decisions,
Yeah.
and that he would help defend you, that your vocal intonation of speech creates your future, and that includes the money.
Yeah.
When I see the beauty of that, I go, this is unstoppable, because it is inspired. And you think about it, well, it does take us to make those decisions, right? That we are going to animate this thing in the nature and character of the one who created it all. And its purpose is to bless and protect. Well, what happens when we consider others in addition to ourselves, right? Growth and in abundance and value, and so much benefit comes from that. And it's so cool, Steve, because when we first started doing this, I'm like, hey, tell us about this right side up thing, Steve. But to see how this is almost a universal truth. It's not even almost, it is a universal truth.
Yes.
And he said that I am the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're talking about antennas. It's kind of a fun little thing. Well, when I first started driving, and maybe you too, antenna looked like a wire sticking up,
Yeah.
on your car. And today, what does it look like? It looks like this sleek little, thing that is, look almost like
Aerodynamic.
part of the body design that's invisible. Yeah. Well, okay, these waveforms that when you speak, well, what are these things we have on the sides of our head?
Yeah.
Jesus, is that why you said we're to live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God? That when he speaks, he's sending these waveforms that enter into the antenna, that then inspire and are now translated by the gray matter in the mind. Oh, wow. Is that why when Peter cut off Malcolmus's ear, that you put it back on and said, dude, don't do that. You're destroying the man's antenna.
That's right.
As long as he's on the planet, he has a chance to hear. He is here because he thinks he's serving God.
And he said many times, those who have ears to hear.
Let him hear the divine decree. There is no power in creation that can stop someone who has made the binary choice to hear.
Well, and he says faith comes through hearing.
There it is.
Wow.
All over the place.
It's all over the place.
It's everywhere if you just, but hey, you can't think see that looking through the lens of the book. You got to let the guy who created and built the book show you how these things work.
Well, they asked him, they're like, show us the Father, man.
Yeah.
And he's like, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. The Father and I are one.
One.
What is this all about? And what did you say the ultimate benefit of this is? The oneness. And if you think about what is sonship, what is adoption as sons, what is being an heir, and what is like a signet ring? What is it to be the one who receives the ring from the Father, but his nature, character, authority? But you don't get that authority in that ring, if you will, without knowing who the Father is.
Well, think about
how amazing.
About what Jesus said about the advocate. And I know we're running out of time here a little bit, but he said, hey, he will disclose to you everything that is mine.
Yeah.
And when I say this to you, that he will disclose to you, all that I have belongs to the Father, and the Father has given everything to me. Everything that the Father has, I have. And so he's going to disclose all of that to you, so that you can see how this thing works. So now going back to the question about Elon. Yeah, Elon hasn't even entered the game yet.
No.
He hasn't even started. because all that Jesus has, he makes available to us so that we can build what the Father has designed to be created from the beginning. Now, he's not going to let you have all the stuff that you want. I'm going to use, the Lambo picture. You're
Yep.
not going to say, no, that you want that. You're going to have to exercise your own labor and exchange that with mammon in order to get that one. But if you want to participate, let me tell you what, the coffers are full.
Steve, let me tell you this. We're out, literally, we hit our 2-hour mark. I don't care if anyone has gotten any benefit from this. I certainly have. And, I think about this. I'm like, whether or not anybody's watching this, whether or not anyone is actually paying attention and listening, I'm hearing it loud and clear. And what's really interesting, Steve, is this is exactly what I needed. And, I was thinking about, I had a difficult time this week. I struggled with a number of things this week. And, it's interesting that God used Whitney Magic to speak to me yesterday, and then you today. To have the revelation and the reminder that that this is a true partnership, and that we do have a role, and that we do. I think about. I've told you in private about this, like desire speak. Right, that was the message. Just do it. And I jokingly say, "Yeah, we're gonna cut some wood today. We're gonna chop at the tree. One day it'll fall." But the same thing would be true is this idea of speaking this vision. And especially one, we talk about in terms, especially in the church, we talk about calling, and I talk about unlocking global generosity that has been reinforced as that's what you're supposed to be doing. And it's by giving. The mechanism is by giving. And I'm going to tell you, Steve, I've shared that with a number of people, and it's just like their eyes get wide and their head explodes and they go, whoa. And I go, okay, there's another data point right there. I'm like, okay, we got to keep speaking this. But I just appreciate it because it's giving me confidence in helping tamp down fear.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
So thank you very, very much. I don't care if anybody else gotten anything from this, but I certainly have, Steve.
It's our telephone call.
That's right. That's right. I hope it's blessed you, though. If you're here, 18 people are still here. Thank you so much for joining the Pulse today. Steve, you are a blessing beyond blessing. I hope you have an incredible weekend. We got one of our toughest football games with high school this evening. My daughter turned 18. She got accepted to Baylor.
Wow.
So I'm like, how am I going to pay for this now? But super, super thankful. And so I would just encourage you and just tell your lovely wife, thank you so much for letting us have your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Have a great weekend, everybody.
All right. Once again, God sees you out the corner of his eye. Folks, this is like a treat. This is amazing. Isn't it neat? You don't really know where it's going to come from, but it's like, if you've got some interest, you're going to see them everywhere you turn. And, you're having difficulty. I mean, I would say in my churchy language, I would say, I've been walking with the Lord for 23 years. And I'll tell you, it's moments like this, and it's in, streams like this where I have these aha moments and they just keep coming. And you just keep on seeing this. And I'm just reminded of how multifaceted this whole thing is. And I'm going to tell you, it's meant to be done in community. And I'm just so thankful that we're doing this in the context of crypto. It seems disjointed. And I think a lot of people will come to this. Like yesterday, when I did the pump stream, right, about Hex going 30%, I had like 100 people. There's 17 here. People hear the word Jesus and they tune out. I hope that you understand that what we're talking about is the very fundamental nature of what it means to be, quote unquote, successful in life. Because the things that we really want aren't the things that we say we want. Because every great story is about a man who wants something and in the process of going to find something greater. Because there are so many flashy objects that are like shaken in front of our face that we think we need or think we want that will make our lives more peaceful. And in reality, the true answer is connecting with the very nature and character of the creator and creation itself. And to see that happening in our community and these people that are seeking, it's such an amazing thing, because I'm actually experiencing what I would consider to be the intent of the quote unquote church. True relationships of people who care, who are not judgmental, who are seeking to encourage and to search and discover and understand and get to know and deeply taste and see that the Lord is good. Steve is an angel, even though that's probably offensive to him. Thanks for joining the Pulse today. My name is Matt, the Scripture Heartbeat. Take care of yourself and do not mess with Texas. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.